Hello, everyone. I am Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and welcome back to Water. Crayon Shin-Chan is an anime I watched as part of my ongoing attempt to have never dropped an anime, and it is long. Crayon Shin-Chan is I believe, as of recording this, the 14th longest anime of all time. In comparison, One Piece is the 16th longest anime of all time. It's basically like a family sitcom based around the Nohara family, starring Shinsuke Nohara, and the focus of the show is pretty much not necessarily Shin himself, but the characters, usually the adults, but sometimes the other kids, around Shin, getting into a bunch of wacky shenanigans, and then Shin himself is basically thrown in there as a wild card. Most of the episodes don't focus on Shin, although some of them do, but it's more like Shin is like the bit of chaos being thrown into the pot, and everyone else is sort of living their lives. Shin is a bit of a rapscallion as a character. He's definitely a bit of a brat. And because of this, I have to say that I love the cast of Shin-Chan. I really do. But the only character I never actually come around to liking is Shin himself. I find him to be, in a lot of cases, annoying. And because the supporting cast is so strong, I'm not even sure if I would argue they're the supporting cast, because the cast, this large ensemble cast, is so likable, and you get to see them experiencing their struggles, sometimes against each other. You usually end up rooting for them. So when Shin comes up and just fucks everything up for everyone, I find myself being irritated right along with them. A lot of these characters, I feel like, man, I just wish you could catch a break. What I really appreciate about the Shin-Chan show is, despite the 1,000+ episodes of this show, running since I think 1992, the show still manages to make me laugh. It still manages to pull into scenarios, and it still manages to be funny. Is it an uproarious riot, start to finish in every episode? Of course not. But the fact that 1,000 episodes in, this show can still get some chuckles out of me is an accomplishment in and of itself. I will say that some of the storylines can be a bit repetitive. Needless to say, over its long run, it repeats story beats. It'll also repeat openings to story arcs sometimes. Occasionally you can catch it being even repetitive in how an episode will start. But all in all, the show is very enjoyable. Sometimes it diverges off into sort of skit comedy a little bit, especially towards the later parts of the show, where it just sort of goes off and it's it takes the characters but places them in a situation they wouldn't normally be in. And I'm not as big of a fan on that. I'm a much bigger fan of when it sticks to the family sitcom angle. But Shin-Chan itself is a moderately funny family sitcom based on a very large, diverse, likable cast of characters that you end up becoming really attached to over the 1,000+ episodes. And of all of my dropped anime, I have to say this is one of the ones that I'm genuinely glad I got to go back to. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 1 Action Kamen vs. Higure Devil is such a fucking weird movie that I'm not fully sure I can describe what it's about. This movie is so weird that I have discovered that it literally invented a fetish, but I will do my best. This movie is about an alien Okame who travels to the set of the Action Kamen filming studio and steals the action gem from Action Kamen, who is, of course, the kids' show star that Shin watches regularly during Shin-Chan. Because as it turns out, Action Kamen is actually a real superhero who just happens to film a kids' TV series based on his actual superhero exploits. So anyway, Higure Mao comes from a parallel universe to steal the action gem because this gem is used to transfer Action Kamen into a parallel universe so that Action Kamen cannot go to the parallel universe and protect them from Higure Mao, who wants to put everyone into leotards and point at their crotch while saying leotard a bunch. And Shin who is, of course, an Action Common fan, is collecting Action Common trading cards and finds a rare 99th Action Common trading card, which acts as a ticket which allows him and his family to go to this parallel universe where they aid in the defeat of the Haigure Devil. And at some point, Shin eats the action gem, and part of the plotline is getting him an enema or like a laxative to shit this fucking gem out. It is absolutely batshit crazy. And I don't even think I did a good job of describing what happened. I'm not even sure if I fully got there. I don't know if I fully understood what the fuck was happening either. This is, I'm not going to say your typical Shin-chan. This isn't like a typical episode. It borders on a bit of like an action series. There's a lot of like raunchy comedy, which is typical of the show itself, but I didn't find anything particularly noteworthy or standout. You do get some good character interactions with the characters, so that's really good if you already like the characters. And obviously, there's just like the whole absurdity of the setting and the situation. So there are things to like about it. I just didn't necessarily find it particularly noteworthy outside of being completely batshit crazy. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 2, The Secret Treasure of Buri Buri Island, is about the Nohara family winning a 6-day vacation to the kingdom of Buri Buri. And while they're on the plane to the kingdom, the plane is hijacked, or the whole trip might actually be orchestrated by an evil secret society, and they're being held hostage by two Okama, which makes the second Shin-chan movie in a row where major antagonists are Okama. I guess read into that what you want. But as it turns out, Shin happens to look almost identical, if not actually identical, to the Prince of the Kingdom. And together, they're supposed to fulfill a prophecy which will open the door to an ancient secret treasure, which is basically two genies that will grant you wishes. The movie had a more of a action twist to it. They're aided by like a sort of like secret agent protector of the prince in this movie. There's more action scenes than in movie 1. But I will also say that I felt like the jokes more consistently landed in this one. One of the great jokes that I appreciated from this movie, and there are several, is that at one point, Misae and Hiro just like break out into song for no fucking reason. It is hilarious. Just impromptu musical number. It's great. And then at one point they do the like Dragon Ball thing where they make a wish to try and just use up the wish so the villain doesn't use it. And Shin wishes for like a TV newscaster's autograph, and then so the genie has to appear in front of the newscaster, and while it's there, the newscaster's like, so while you're getting my autograph, you want to do an interview? And the genie's like, yeah. It's fucking hilarious. This movie is actually pretty funny. The action scenes, I think, can drag a little bit, and I find, honestly, the plot is a lot less interesting than movie 1, because really, where do you go from that batshit craziness? But I will say that overall, I found this movie was actually more enjoyable. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 3, Unu Kokusai's ambition, involves basically a time cop sensing a time disturbance in the Sengoku period, I want to say, and she enlists the help of the Nohara family to travel back to the Sengoku period to defeat the time disturbance, who is led by... It's hard not to project my modern sensibilities on this. I want to describe them as basically a social media influencer, where they meet a samurai woman who is pretending to be a man to get back her trans sister. That old chestnut, basically, who has been kidnapped by the social media influencer. This movie is not very funny. There's a brief, I think, one joke that made me laugh at like the tail end of the movie, but most of it is just like a huge action set piece. I don't think there's a specific reason they chose the Sengoku period other than it has samurais. They don't really do anything with the time period. It plays a bit into some archetypes. It's not particularly interesting. There is a brief setup for a sort of love triangle between Hiro, Misae, and the new samurai lady, but that pretty much gets dismissed immediately because Hiro and Misae are like basically incapacitated, and then you find out samurai lady's a lady, and that puts the whole kibosh on what brief little love triangle had going. So this movie doesn't really have anything going for it. There is a half-decent action scene, but most of it's just kind of bland. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 4 Adventures in Hinderland is about Shin and his class going to a theme park called Hinderland, where they discover that two, I want to say, brother Okama have sealed a magical princess in their theme park, and Shin encounters a talking doll who gives him magic cards and asks him to fight the brothers, which he is initially reluctant to do until a killer snowman, who turns out to be the magical prince from the other world, tries to kill him. They common gag in this is how the cards work, which is Shin says a magic spell, and then they have some ambiguous magical effect. One of the running gags is that he keeps summoning this, like, hot girl to his side to demonstrate the effects of the magic, who may or may not be a real person. I'm not sure. What I will point out is that this is the fourth Shin-chan movie, and the third of which Okama are featured as antagonists. And look, I'm not one to cry homophobia, but I'm starting to see a pattern develop. If it gets one more, it might start going into undeniable territory, but we'll keep our fingers on the pulse and see how that situation develops. Regardless, this movie has its moments. It does. There are some chuckle-worthy scenes, but a whole lot of it is kind of dull and boring, especially the lead-in. A good initial chunk of this movie is just the kids at Hinderland just fucking around in a theme park, but like not in an entertaining way and not in a way where we get to see the characters play off of each other. They're just literally fucking around in a theme park. It's kind of boring. And then Shin goes on his like reluctant hero kick, and nothing really happens with that. There's a whole lot of nothing happening in this movie, and the slight gags don't really make up for it. So far, this is probably the worst of the movies. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 5 Pursuit of the Balls of Darkness is about a demon who was sealed away hundreds, maybe thousands of years, I don't fully remember the time period, ago, and was sealed into two magic balls. I could be getting bits and pieces of this mixed up. It was kind of boring. But there are basically two clans related to the sealing of this demon. A group of people are trying to get a hold of the balls of darkness to unseal the demon and use its power to take over the world, but they are being opposed by a group of 3 Okama, which makes it the fourth of the 5 Shin-chan movies to have Okama, but there's a plot twist this time because they're the good guys. Anyway, Himawari swallows one of the balls of darkness, and that ends up getting the Naharas involved in the situation, and so the bad guys are trying to get the ball from Himawari's stomach, preferably by her just shitting it out. There's no implication of baby murder that I can recall offhandedly during this. But at the end of the movie, because I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it, we do get a confirmation of something that I had been suspecting in the previous movies, because although the Okama that we follow throughout the entire movie are the good guys in this film, when they do unseal the demon at the end, there is this amazingly offensive line, which is that having been without his balls for thousands of years, he has turned gay. And I heard that, and I'm like, well, that's just about the most offensive thing I've heard all day. Anyway, this movie also has a incompetent detective woman who can't shoot her gun for shit. But I feel like the standout character that's introduced in this movie is actually the sort of like the grandmother of the villains here. She is very beholden to like rules and cultural rituals. And that, I think, it can be amusing. That's where I get most of my amusement from this movie. This is a very gag-heavy movie. There's a lot of repeating gags, and sometimes the action and the flow of the scenes will just dead stop to enable the gags. And I will actually say that compared to the other movies, this one has a lighter tone. And I'm not a fan of that, actually. I feel like this movie didn't take itself seriously enough, and it, over time, just became too gag-heavy, and I kind of started losing interest. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 6, Blitzkrieg, Pighoof's Secret Mission, is about a sexy secret agent MILF, codenamed Sexy, infiltrating the secret evil organization Pighoof, whose goal is to create a virus that will allow them to take control of all of the computer systems in the world so that they can control the world. And on her mission, she ends up in the same area as the kindergarten that Shin-chan and his classmates go to. I do not remember the name of this kindergarten off the top of my head. And they all end up getting kidnapped by the Pighoof organization. And in order to save her and the kids, another member of the organization that Sexy is a part of, called SML, which is an acronym that I could not possibly tell you what it stands for because it's a weird mixture of Japanese and English, shows up, and he is trying to find images of the kids who are missing, and he goes to the Nohara family, and they end up following him. I don't remember if I called this guy by his codename. This codename is Muscle. And they end up following him on a secret mission to try and rescue Sexy and the kids. During the course of this, Sexy tries to break out a few times. The kids manage to escape, but then they have to go back because they don't have food and they're in the middle of a desert. It's like a whole thing, and it all culminates in Muscle, Sexy, and the Noharas infiltrating the Pighoof base and trying to get there right as the virus is about to take control over the world. In this movie, there is also a crazy professor man who thinks that slippers are the greatest invention humanity has ever created, and his Okama assistant, who is a good guy in this film. And I'm only bringing it up because there is a weird obsession with Okama through across all the Shin-chan movies, and at this point, to me, it's just like a counter that needs to be like checked down. Like it's like a how homophobic is this Shin-chan movie on a scale from 1 to 10. It's getting gradually less offensive, I think, as it goes, but it never manages to get all the way to 0. And that's certainly worth mentioning, I guess, if you're sensitive to that. This movie does improve the action sequences over other movies, and I will say that this movie can be a bit gaggy. Sometimes it works, sometimes the gags are appropriately placed, like the Nohara's trying to fight back against Muscle by trying to make him pee his pants, so they're like blackmailing him, but sometimes the scenes come to like dead stops in order to get to the gag. They haven't really gotten over their gag problem, but this movie is an improvement on at least both of those aspects. What I think it gets me about this film, and why I don't think this, although it has the potential to be one of the better Shin-chan films, why I don't think it manages to get all the way there is because a lot of this movie feels like nothing is actually happening. Sure, we have characters talking about the plot and managing to escape, but then they just like come back and get recaptured. This happens like 2 or 3 times. It has more of a focus on Hiro and Masai Nohara, who are honestly like my 2 favorite characters in Shin-chan. And Shin takes a bit of a more of a backseat to this, like he does in the show, and like he honestly should, because Shin can be very irritating in large doses. So it has some good like fan servicey moments. The animation's actually not bad for a 1998 film. I was impressed on that. But yeah, it does feel like this movie doesn't really accomplish anything for a major bit of its runtime, and I can't really say that it feels like any of the characters got any sort of actual development, even the newly introduced side characters, so it does feel like the movie's kind of wasting time at parts. It's a decent watch. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 7 Explosion, the Hot Springs feel-good final battle, starts with Shin giving an old man a bath, and then we find out that the Japanese government has a secret agency designed to protect the hot springs of Japan, and they are being posed by the evil organization called the Hot Springs Chillers or something like that, whose goals are basically to destroy all of the Japanese baths and possibly turn the entire ocean into a hot spring. Their motivations are a bit confused, and I think part of it is because that there's actually 3 villains all with their own motivations, although only one of them is actually developed in any meaningful way. But what I will say about this movie is there is no full-on Okama in this movie. So you could mark that down as a plus, except for one of the main villains is a Bishonen gay man, and I think that makes like the 5th or 6th Shin-chan movie, and that makes the 5th Shin-chan movie, where one of the main villains is a gay man, and they play into it a little bit less than they normally do, but there's still some anti-gay jokes on this. So as far as the Shin-chan homophobia meter, I'm gonna put this one at decent, all right? I think it's a little more homophobic than the last few we watched, but it's not as bad as the first 2. So there you go. That's where we are in the homophobia meter in movie 7. Anyway, turns out underneath the Nohara household is the Golden Hot Spring, which can be used to save the world and is super refreshing and mystical and shit. I don't know. It's kind of confused. The whole thing is kind of, it leans heavily into action tropes. This is yet another Shin-chan movie that goes heavy into the action, but I will say you get to see a lot of cameos from your favorite characters, even if they don't have too much of their own parts to deal with in this movie. Then ends in a big ol' fight at the end, because the Noharas are powered up by the power of the Golden Hot Spring with the help of that certain old man at the beginning. How is he related? I won't tell you. But they transform into superheroes and they fight a big robot and then everyone's happy. Hot springs for life, bitches. I will say the best part of this movie was by far the end of it. There's a cute little dance at the end during the credits, and then there are a series of shorts, which are honestly the best parts of the movie to me. They were cute, they were funny, there was a whole musical number about constipation. It was delightful. The movie itself had its boring moments, and like I said, I felt like sometimes the plot was confused. I didn't fully grasp what was happening. That could have been on me this time. I will admit it didn't get my fullest of attention, but there were some chuckle-worthy moments. So this one isn't a complete time sink. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 8, The Storm Called the Jungle, is about the kids of the Defense Force going to see a movie on a luxury cruise liner, and the parents and adults get kidnapped by monkeys, and then the kids decide to go out into the jungle to try and save them, and then when they get there, they find out that the monkeys were being controlled by a dude called the Paradise King, who wants to beat the shit out of Action Common. This movie is so boring. Nothing happens in it. It's that everything I just said is all that happens. There's a elongated action scene in it. None of the jokes get anywhere close to landing. As far as one of the things some of the other movies do would give you brief cameos of some of your favorite Shin-chan characters, doesn't even really happen in this one. It's just, here's some boring action scenes and some monkeys. I will say this is probably the least offensive of all of the Shin-chan movies. So I'm going to put this one at a 0 homophobia. That is mostly related to the fact that there are no gay characters in this. But yeah, aside from the fact of this is the least offensive Shin-chan movie, this is also the worst Shin-chan movie so far. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 9, The Storm Called The Adult Empire Strikes Back, starts with Misae and Shin acting as defense for, like, Tokyo Tower in the 1970s, during the 1970s World Fair, and then Hiro turns into a giant and fights some kind of kaiju monster, and then you find out that, really, they're just in, like, a recording studio based on, I believe, a theme park, where the whole idea is you relive the 20th century. And it is ran by an evil organization called Yesterday Once More, whose goal is to make it so that the turn of the millennium never happened, and so that all of time goes back to the 20th century, so everyone can relive their, like, nostalgic past. And they end up using mind control scents that are somehow broadcasted through radio towers to basically bring everyone back to, like, their times of childhood and their times of nostalgia. While worth noting that inside of this theme park, it is always evening time because it's the most nostalgic time. And this scent doesn't seem to affect really young children, but it did affect the, like, high school gangster girls. So I'm not quite sure what age the scent works on and does not work on, but regardless, it's up to the defense force to basically save their parents, and then they have to defeat the Yesterday Once More organization. This is the most popular Shin-chan movie. It's the highest rated one, and I understand why. I think themes of wanting to relive the past and feeling of nostalgia speaks to a lot of people, and the heavy use of, like, evening, like, orange color tones really adds this, like, nice aesthetic to this film as well. There is a good scene in the middle of it where you get to see sort of like flashbacks for Hiro to his childhood and when he meets Misae and, like, his high school days. And I thought that was a really well done sequence, and I really appreciated it. But to me, this movie doesn't really have a whole lot going to it. It definitely is attached to its themes of nostalgia pretty heavily, but because of that, it also feels like the movie isn't necessarily going anywhere. Towards the end of the film, people begin to accept that the future must go on, but it means that the characters throughout the course of the movie don't really have much of a change. It's also a little too action heavy, and I know I complain about this like every Shin-chan movie, but you have to keep in mind the Shin-chan TV show is a comedy. It's a sitcom, basically. So the fact that all of these movies go so heavily into, like, action genre is completely baffling, especially because they're not particularly good at it. I will say that this is probably, from a more overall quality-wise, one of the better Shin-chan films, but I definitely didn't enjoy it. Crayon Shin-chan, The Storm Called The Battle of the Warring States, involves the Nohara family having a dream about a Japanese princess, and then, after finding a mysterious letter buried in their backyard, Shin, and then later the rest of the Noharas, travel back in time to the Warring States period, where Shin makes friends with a samurai who has a sort of, like, romantic interest in the princess, but he would never act on it, and she has an interest in him because they used to be childhood friends, but her hand is being promised to a rival warlord's son, but due to the power of love, they end up breaking off the engagement, which results in a war between the two sides. So there's a lot of elements going on with this. In a way, it's sort of like Romeo and Juliet, not necessarily like the two houses are at war kind of thing, but like the woman is of higher station and the man is of lower station, and so they can't be together despite their mutual feelings for each other. And of course, the woman has like political obligations. It's an old chestnut. Everyone knows the idea about it, but it's also, so it's sort of like a tragic love story wrapped in a war plot. So far, this is the best of the Shin-chan movies. The lead into the war is exciting. You get to see the calm before the storm, because you get to see like Shin interact with the people of the past and the people of the area before the war breaks out. So it means a little bit more when it happens. You come to like all of the new characters, or at least the important characters being the princess and the samurai. And there's a touching little moment about the Shin making a promise to the samurai to not reveal his feelings to the princess. This sort of like warrior's sword promise, which is a very well done scene, and I think is echoed even better towards the end when Shin renews his promise with the sword given to him by the samurai. A little conflicted on the ending, but I have to say, all in all, this was a solid movie start to stop. I normally look to Shin-chan movies for like comedy because Shin-chan's a comedy, and this one wasn't particularly funny, but I will say that I think every other aspect of it manages to work on a high enough level that I'm willing to forgive that. And as far as the homophobia meter goes, it is limited to only a single line, making this one of the least homophobic of all of the Shin-chan movies. Crayon Shin-chan, The Storm Called Yakiniku Road of Honor, starts with a guy barging into the Nohara's family after they talk about how they're going to have a bunch of meat that night, and then he is followed by another man who tries to kidnap the Noharas, and they end up going on the run because, like, false police reports get filed for all of them, and they become, like, Japan's most wanted families, and everyone's trying to bring them in and catch them for a reason they don't know. But as it turns out, the original guy that broke into their house set their voice as a password to a mind control device. 99% of this movie is just the Noharas on the run, and then I think once per family member we get a scene where that member of the family fantasizes about eating meat. This movie is the first of the Shin-chan movies where it feels like it is a genuine waste of my time. Not a single interesting thing happens in it. There's a half-handed attempt at, like, a few jokes, but like some of the worst Shin-chan movies, it's very gaggy. It's just the Noharas on the run the entire time, and it's not until the very tail end of the movie that we even know what they're on the run from. There's mild homophobia in this movie. There is a sexually aggressive gay man, but he is actually on the Nohara side, and he actually seems like a rather cool guy. So I guess take that for what you will. But overall, this movie sucks, it's boring, and this is the first one that I genuinely recommend not watching. Crayon Shin-chan, The Storm Called The Kasukabe Boys of the Evening Sun involves the Kasukabe Defense Force getting sucked into a movie, and then the rest of the Noharas also get sucked into a movie. It's a Western, and it is a small town being ran by a guy called Justice Man, and it's called Justice City that it takes place in this, like, Western movie world. And inside of the movie world, anyone who is trapped inside of the movie basically starts forgetting their past life and starts being sort of dragged into, indoctrinated into the script of the movie. The movie itself is left in an unfinished state, and in order to escape from the movie, the Noharas and the Kasukabe Defense Force need to finish the plot of the movie, overthrow Justice Man. It's a rather, I will say, overdone plot. I think a lot of people have probably experienced the same idea before, and it doesn't really do anything particularly interesting with it. It does do some things, I will say. They introduce this girl named, I want to say, Tsubaki, who forms a bit of a relationship with Shin-chan, and she's, I really think, the only character in this that has much of an arc. You could make an argument that some of the Kasukabe forces learn to more accept their everyday life. So there are things going on in this movie. The problem is that this is yet another Shin-chan movie that just lends so heavily into the action genre and so far out of the comedy genre. Like, the great thing about the Shin-chan show is like the situational sitcom comedy with a large cast of likable characters. And as I'm going into this, the movies are doing absolutely nothing with their cast and are doing absolutely nothing in the comedy direction. And it's getting to the point where it's driving me fucking crazy. Like, I don't understand who these movies are for, because nobody who enjoys the Shin-chan TV show would enjoy this crap. Homophobia non-existent. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 13, The Legend Called Buri Buri 3 Minutes Charge, has a extra-dimensional space-time continuum entity possess one of Shin's toy dinosaurs and then contract the Nohara family to go into a sort of alternate timelines to defeat kaiju so that the timeline can be fixed because alien kaiju monsters are attacking from another universe, and they transform into different forms that they choose in order to fight the kaijus. You can, if you've made it this far, probably guess exactly what I'm going to say about this. There's too much action, there's not enough comedy, and nothing goddamn happens. This entire movie is basically just the ending sequence of movie 7, the hot spring one, where the whole family transforms to fight the giant monster, except it's stretched out over the course of an entire movie. There is little bit of touches on the Noharas sort of becoming addicted to the transformations and the attentions of the transformations, but they don't really develop this in any meaningful way, and nothing really comes from it. The only redeeming factor of this entire film is the transformations Misae makes have just excellent character designs, and that there is also no homophobia in this one. Crayon Shin-chan movie 14, The Legend Called a Dance Amigo, is a horror movie. People are being replaced by these monsters called imposters who look and act exactly like them and are slowly taking over the entire city, or I should probably say rapidly taking over the entire city, considering the whole city falls in like a week or so. And they're super into samba, the dance, and are trying to force people to samba, and they are obsessed with samba. If music is playing, they have to be sambaing. And we're just going to get this out of the way quickly so I can talk about the meat and potatoes of this. The homophobia meter on this movie is pretty low. There is a scene where two, I assume Okama, attempt to stop Hiro from running away from some of the imposters, but as we later find out, they themselves are imposters. So you could make an argument that it plays a little bit on a sort of offensive stereotype about gay men being sexual predators, but considering that everything in the monster is actually predatory and they are actually monsters, I think you'd kind of be stretching it just so you could be offended in that scene. Another thing I want to say before we get any further is that this is, so far, the best Shin-chan movie. It was like on the very cusp of being an 8, and I had to make an internal debate and a judgment call on whether it actually deserves it or not. Anyway, this movie's horror aspects play into like body horror with this like horrifying expressions and the weird distortions of the faces and limbs of the imposter monsters, the creepy way they like crawl on all 4 limbs, and of course it's like you don't know who you can trust, and like the rampant paranoia of anyone around you could be an enemy. And then when you get towards the latter half of the film, you have the discovery of everyone who's been taken in the imposters just forced into this like horrible cavern, forced to dance endlessly against their will. It's honestly a little disturbing. I'm not going to say this will like give you nightmares or anything, but I will say it is handled pretty well and is actually kind of creepy at times. This movie also manages to get some funny gags, mostly towards the end where the tone starts lightening up from the horror aspects. It doesn't maintain a horror vibe throughout the entire thing, especially towards the ending like fight scenes when they're starting to take out the imposters. It ends in a Cutie Honey styled dance off with a newly introduced character called Jackie, who is fucking badass. She's like this like cool Onesan type character. I love her. And the main villain who's obsessed with samba, and in the middle of it she ends up having this like completed character arc where she learns to dance her own samba. This is a fun movie all around. It's got its creepy moments. It's got its dramatically tense moments when you think a character's gonna die. This has everything. Crayon Shin-chan movie 15, The Storm Called the Singing Buttocks Bomb. A bunch of aliens have a bomb that are capable of blowing up planets. I think we even see one blow up a star. It might have just been a planet, but it can definitely blow up planets. It lands down on Earth and it attaches itself in the form of a diaper to the Nohara family dog Shiro's ass. 2 major organizations are trying to get a hold of it. A organization that's specifically designed to prevent extraterrestrial threats, and another organization that I think they're trying to destroy the world or hold it ransom. It's kind of hard to figure out. It's a little contradictory. It doesn't really matter. What I will say is that the 2 antagonists of this film, the sort of government agent that monitors space stuff, is this like sort of hoity-toity, but honestly reasonable kind of guy who sticks a little too closely to his plan. He's got that sort of like Eisen-esque, like smart guy persona to him. And then the female antagonist is part of the terrorist group that's like trying to destroy the world. She's like this outrageous, ostentatious, like gaudy performer who introduces herself with musicals, and her henchmen are all wearing like burlesque outfits, and she's like completely out there, and they're like complete polar opposites of each other. And they're both great characters, and I love them both. They bring so much style and flair and personality to the movie, and they're great for like the first half of the movie, and then the whole film just devolves into a boring action flick. Now, I have given praise to other genre subversions from the TV show, namely the like tragic war story and the horror movie. So I think I should briefly explain, since there's nothing worth addressing in this movie, why I have a problem with the action movies specifically. And there's nothing inherently wrong with an action movie if you do it right. The problem is that the action is just boring. If it wasn't boring action, it would not be a problem. I will say this movie is very well animated. It looks very clean, very high resolution. I think this might be when the animation style changed in the anime. I will also say there's no real moment of homophobia in this, and honestly, I can probably just drop this gag now because I'm not expecting it to keep coming up. I don't think I have to say that it doesn't really happen or that it's not that big of a deal anymore, because I'm not expecting it to be too much of a big of a deal. And if I can explain that a little bit more, I had a theory while watching the films, and I'm sort of being reinforced, of course I don't really know, that a major through line between the like massive homophobic themes that occur in the earlier movies is that all of the earlier movies were directed and in part written by a man named Keiichi Hara, who oversaw like the first 10, 11 films. And as you may have noticed, if you've been watching all of the reviews, this kind of tapered off, like the homophobic comments tapered off as we progressed through the movie line. And that's because Keiichi Hara stopped working on the Shin-Chan movies. And again, I don't know this for certain, but I've always kind of suspected that he's the one that's bringing that kind of energy to the films. Anyway, this movie is boring, but it looks pretty. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 16, The Storm Called the Hero of Kinpoko, is about a prophecy about a bronze bell that will help you find a silver shield and a golden sword that will be used by the Chosen One, who happens to be Shin, to defeat a enemy called like Dark Ash from another world. The monsters only appear at night, and like I don't think it has anything to do with dreams, but there's a lot of dream symbolism in this kind of movie, so it might have something to do with dreams. Not fully sure what's going on with that, to be honest. But it's definitely another world, and like Dark Ash is taking control of this other world and is like an evil dictator, and then the villains attack Shin at night and nobody believes him. There's also a strange amount of anti-global warming messaging in this movie, but they don't like delve into it, and it's not a plot point. They just keep like offhandedly mentioning it. It's kind of strange. Anyway, this movie is gorgeous, great animation, great set pieces, beautiful background design, beautiful background art, some pretty good character design. It's boring as sin. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 17, Roar Kasukabe Animal Kingdom. A hot mayor gets elected into town, and it turns out he's actually an eco-terrorist who's creating a formula that, when drunk, will turn people into animals so that he can save the planet. This movie kind of expands on the weird offhanded ecological comments made in the last movie, but then turns it into the main villain's plot. It's kind of strange, turned but like eco-terrorism into the central focus, almost as if it kind of made fun of the last movie. Anyway, Hiro and Misae end up getting turned into animals, and then later on, eventually, basically, the formula gets out and everyone turns into animals. And the guy's basically just doing it to like spite his wife. There are a few funny gags towards the end of this movie. Like at one point, Hiro is turned into a chicken, like looks over at Misae and is like, "I'm the ordinary chicken." And then he like rushes the bad guy who just fucking backhands him. There's a lot of like little comedic moments like that. especially towards the end, where there is a few chuckle-worthy gags, but it just hits right at the ending, and most of this movie is just super boring. Crayon Shin-chan, movie 18, The Storm Called My Bride. So, the Kasukabe Defense Force are in the park talking about what they would like to do in the future when a woman comes from the future who is actually future Shin's fiancé to retrieve child Shin because future Shin has been captured and imprisoned by the leader of a future mega corporation. So she takes Shin, and the Kasukabe Defense Force end up coming with her on accident to the future, where the future is controlled by the mega corporation, and everyone lives in Neo Tokyo, which was created when a meteor shower ended up destroying most of the Earth. So this is a post-apocalyptic dystopian future where the future's ran by mega corporations, right? And Shin is like a superhero. He kind of seems like he took up the mantle of Action Kamen because he wears an Action Kamen outfit. And as it turns out, Shin's future fiance is actually the daughter of the leader of the mega corporation. So there ends up a kidnapping attempt on her from these like soldiers working for the mega corporation who are all dressed like brides. I love that detail. And the head of the mega corporation tries to marry her off to Kazuma Toru, one of the members of the Kasukabe Defense Force, but like in the future version of him. And throughout the course of this movie, we get to see not every Shin-chan character, but we get to see the Noharas and the Kasukabe Defense Force, and we get to see what they're up to in this dystopian hellscape. And there's a lot of like interesting character work there. You get to see the like Shin's future fiance interacting with Shin as a child. And I love how they start by talking about their future, then they get to see their future, and then the whole part of the movie is to stop a wedding. So the enemy like soldiers are all dressed as brides because they can't get married. So there's some clever things going on with the writing too. It's nothing too great, but just the fact that this is a Shin-chan movie that actually does literally anything with the characters makes it A-okay in my book. Crayon Shin-chan movie 19, The Storm Called Operation Golden Spy. In an attempt to end global warming, a doctor tries to create a form of potatoes that makes it so you don't fart. However, he accidentally creates Mega Bomb 2, a type of potato jelly that makes it so you can't stop farting. In order to destroy the world, or I should say cover it in fart gas, and become the world's top military power, Silent Fartland, the country, tries to get a hold of this formula by hiring a spy family. The spy family sends Pickled Lemon, a young girl, brings Shin-chan into her spy organization so that they can use Shin-chan, whose body can act as a key to acquire Mega Bomb 2 from the professor who created the fart jelly. This is an action movie / spy flick / heist movie, and I really like Pickled Lemon as a character because she starts off committed to her mission, but then she grows to like Shin, and then towards the end of the movie, she decides to do what she believes is right, rebels against her parents, and decides to save the world, even though everyone was trying to stop her. She has a nice little arc. She's a likable character. Everything else in this movie is kind of terrible. The action's boring. The heist is mostly just boiled down to Shin doing backflips around lasers, and the entire thing is just literal toilet humor. Crayon Shin-chan movie 20, The Storm Called Me and the Space Princess. So, as it turns out, Himawari is involved in an ancient prophecy where she will basically bring happiness, peace, and prosperity to planet Himawari and Earth and possibly all of the other planets in the solar system, because Himawari is capable of generating Hema energy or something. The word Hema is involved in what she generates, which is basically what causes happiness and peace. The idea is that Earth is not really producing enough Hema energy, so planet Himawari keeps having to send their Hema energy over to Earth. Otherwise, like, all hell will break out and it'll turn into an apocalypse on Earth. And if Earth's unhappy, so is planet Himawari. But the planet Himawari is not generating enough happiness energy. It's not generating enough Hima energy. So when they find Himawari, Nohara, they bring her. And Shin, who gets pissed off that Himawari stole his snack, sells Himawari to the planet Himawari space aliens so they can use her as the titular space princess to bring Hima energy and bring peace to the solar system. This is the most like a movie of most of the Shin-chan movies. Most of the Shin-chan movies are just like, here's our setup, here's prolonged action scenes. This is like an actual movie, right? There's a beginning, a setup to the central conflict. Shin is sick of Himawari. Himawari gets abducted by aliens. Then we get a chill out in Himawari planet, understand the situation. There's a rising tension as the Noharas are trying to get in touch with Himawari, but the aliens won't let them. Then they reach their tipping point where they get kicked off the planet. And then it all leads up into the climax where they're trying to get Himawari back as they like dramatically risking themselves to save their sister/daughter. The action scenes in this can be a little dull, but they are actually creative. It's not just like constant explosions and fighting and kicking. There's like a sumo match, and there's a sort of this semi-philosophical debate. And the bad guys in this movie aren't bad guys. They're antagonists, but arguably they are correct because they want to bring peace and prosperity to the galaxy, which is actually a constant theme in a lot of the Shin-chan movies, is that the bad guys are usually right and the Noharas just care about their family so much that they're willing to destroy everyone for them. But in this one, they're even more right, because usually when the bad guys are right, it involves, I should say the antagonists are right, it involves like the death of a Nohara, but in this case, they want to make Himawari their princess for like 20 years and pamper the living shit out of her. So there's some interesting sort of like philosophical debates in this. There's a nice message of hope at the end when the main villain decides to trust the Noharas. I should call him an antagonist. The main antagonist chooses to trust the Noharas. And there is a nice little arc for Shin as he realizes that he does care about Himawari. I will say that this movie does have Shin at his most obnoxious, and this movie does have its dull parts, but overall, it is enjoyable. Crayon Shin-chan, Movie 21, very tasty B-class gourmet survival. A festival of B-class chefs, which I do not know what that means, it's mostly portrayed as cooking noodles, is happening not, I don't think in Kasukabe, but like in a nearby area. And the Kasukabe Defense Force wants to go to the festival. So they decide to go on a journey without telling any of their parents, get on a bus, but they encounter a woman wearing purple panties. For some reason, that is like her defining character trait, right? Who gives them the secret sauce to bring to a guy named Sauce Ken, who is sort of like the, I guess, de facto leader of the B-class gourmets in the festival, because the A-class gourmet organization is offended by the festival, and they all cook high-class hoity-toity foods, stuff like truffles, caviar, just the real fancy stuff, right? And they're offended by this, so they're trying to destroy the sauce and ruin the B-class festival so that somehow, I don't know the thought process, but everyone in the world is supposed to become an A-class gourmet chef. I'm not sure how that was supposed to work. I might have missed something. I think I was too distracted by how batshit crazy that plan sounded. Anyway, this is basically your classic shitty Shin-chan movie where Shin and the Kasukabe Defense Force are on the run from a threat, but this time they have to protect a sauce bucket. Shin is obnoxious in this one. He keeps trying to get rid of the sauce, and we get to see conflicts between the defense force, whatever. It's fine. I think some of the villains are kind of entertaining at points. It's not like the boring slog a lot of the action movies are, but there's nothing great here. It did make me hungry, though. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 22, Serious Battle, Robot Dad Strikes Back. This is, without a doubt, the best Shin-Chan movie, probably ever. Honestly, I'm not expecting any of the future ones to get any better than this. And I'm actually probably not the only one that thinks this, considering I believe this is the only Shin-Chan movie that ever won an award, being the winner of the Excellence Award at the 18th Japan Media Arts Festival. So Hiro just watches a movie with Shin, and he puts Shin on his back, hurts his back, and then while going out, encounters a woman who offers to fix basically all of his problems in life. Turns out, he gets replaced by a robot. So, upon finding this out and going back home, his family doesn't believe that this robot is him, so Masae ends up going to the police, which brings in this young, ditzy police investigator woman who is utterly incompetent in every way to help investigate the case of the missing Hiro. While this is happening, Robo Hiro tries to make sort of like amends with his family, and he uses his robo powers to like fix up the house, cook a dinner. He basically like wins them over, turns into super dad, goes to work, becomes like the hero of his workplace. There's a lot of like sweet and cute moments between him and Masae that just like they're so adorable. It's great. I love watching those two characters specifically interact romantically with each other because they just don't do it often enough, especially in these movies. So there's like a lot of heartwarming scenes in this, especially towards like the midpoint. And then he wins over his family even further because at one point they go to a robo construction site and the Kasukabe Defense Force ends up getting in trouble with robots. But Robo Hiro ends up saving everyone. So that's pretty great. But then the same lady comes back, gives Robo Hiro a robot mustache, which makes him go crazy. And at the start of the movie, they talk about how like dads are being like worn down by like moms and children, and there's this whole scene where the bunch of dads get kicked out of the park, but then Robo Hiro with his new mustache rises up as this sort of like dictatorial father figure who gets together all of the like the men and the fathers of Japan and creates the organization Boobs to try and reform Japanese society and restore respect to fathers across the country. There's a few more elements around the movie. I don't want to get into all of the minutia, but I will have to say that this movie is great. The action is short, but snappy and entertaining. There's a lot of heartwarming family bonding moments. This movie is actually funny, especially towards the end. There's a lot of things that got me cracking up. They know how to make the jokes punchy without dwelling on them and without getting too absurd and out of place. And that final confrontation between Hiro and Robo Dad had me both at the edge of my seat and cheering and emotionally, not literally crying. This movie has basically everything and it would honestly stack up among some of the best episodes of the actual TV show. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 23, My Moving Story, The Great Cactus Attack. Basically, this is a zombie movie, but with cactuses. So, the Noharas end up moving to Mexico because of Hiro's job, wants to move into selling cactus fruit. So they move to Mexico, and during the Cactus Festival, the cactuses just start attacking and eating people. And from that point on, it follows a typical zombie structure where there's a group of survivors holed up in a building, and then they have to make runs outside of the building to accomplish their goals, and then they basically fend off the cactuses. It's entertaining in a certain way, and that they manage to do like some interesting things with it, and they don't prolong too much of the cactus scenes. And there is a bit of an escalation of tension, but a lot of the newer characters are kind of flat. And this, I remember, had quite a big build-up in the actual show, because there is even like tie-in episodes dedicated to it, and it did kind of come out to be a bit of a disappointment for how much of a deal they made. It's not bad by any means, but it's also nothing to write home about. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 24, Fast Asleep, The Great Assault on the Dreaming World. A dream experiment goes wrong and ends up swallowing the mother of a young girl named Saki. who ever since has been plagued by horrible nightmares of her mom basically terrorizing and I think possibly threatening to kill her in like real life through her dreams, Freddy Krueger style. So to help her, her dad brings her around to various towns, to various locations, and absorbs the good dreams of the children and to a lesser extent the adults in the surrounding areas, and then they use up all the good dreams from the town, and then they'll move on to a different area. Saki ends up making friends with the Kasukabe Defense Force, and together they end up going on a dream to solve Saki's problems by finding the, I want to try and say this right, the Baku, I think it's called, which will basically defeat the nightmare monster and save Saki's dreams. The visuals on this movie are pretty great. I love Saki's character design, and her character itself is also kind of interesting. I do love the little arc of her being emotionally distant at the beginning and then coming into her own, opening up to her friends, learning to, accept help from them, learning to make other friends in her new school. So she has a nice little arc. I will also say that very rarely in the Shin-chan show, Shin will actually be a decent person and not an obnoxious little fuckwit. And this movie is one of the rare examples where Shin actually shows his sweeter side and comes in and actually decides that he's the one in this movie that is spearheading helping Saki. Where in like 90% of the other movies, Shin would be totally against the idea. So it is nice to see the nicer part of Shin's personality, which doesn't get picked up in as many movies. The movie is watchable, but I will say that I didn't feel like there was a lot to grab onto, either like narratively or because we don't really get to delve too far into the characters. So it was pretty, and there was stuff going on, but it was a little shallow. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 25, Invasion Alien Shiriri. An alien crashes into the Nohara household and then turns Misae and Hiro into children. He is looking for his lost father, who is halfway across the country, and in order to turn themselves back into adults, they need to find the father because members of the alien species that the alien child is from have the ability to make things grow. When they get there, it turns out that the dad's an asshole. Big shocker. So is, for the record, the kid. He's very annoying, very much a dickhead, and I'm not going to say he doesn't become better at the end, but I will say when you compare him to a character like Saki from the last movie, who also started as an asshole, the amount of time that this alien kid was an asshole in this movie was the majority of the runtime. And I think that makes all of the difference. Other than that, this movie is honestly kind of boring and doesn't have a whole lot of conflict outside of the alien conspiracy theorist at the midpoint. Crayon Shin-chan Movie 26, First Serving, Kung Fu Boys, Ramen Rebellion. Now, before we get too far into it, I think there's 2 points of order we need to talk about. One of which is, despite the name being Ramen Rebellion, I think it's probably meant to be ramen, which is a Chinese dish, because ramen is a Japanese food, and I did double check that just in case I was wrong. So yeah, despite the title being Ramen Rebellion, it was probably supposed to be Ramen Rebellion, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that this is the final movie vocal performance of Akiko Yajima as Shinosuke Nohara. So the movies are going to be real weird from this point on. I remember when the voice changed in like the show, and it was like the next actor is like pretty close, but they're not all the way there, and you can just hear something wrong, especially after so much time with the same voice actress. Anyway, here's the deal. Panda Ramen, Black Panda Ramen, is coming to town in Chinese town, and the ramen makes people aggressive, makes people angry, makes people gotta have that Black Panda Ramen. So, Misao is learning Kung Fu from, I think, another noodle shop in Chinatown. This is the Kasukabe Chinatown, for the record. And the Kasukabe Defense Force end up also learning Kung Fu when Black Panda Ramen starts like pushing into their territory, right? So basically, they have to fend off Black Panda ramen. At one point, Himawari accidentally eats the ramen. She gets Black Panda'd. She turns aggressive. And basically, it's about saving Himawari, saving the town from the evil spreading influence of Black Panda ramen, and defeating them. Movie itself is a sort of kung fu martial arts type movie with some comedy sprinkled in, although I don't think it ever manages to be consistently funny. I think there was like 1 or 2 chuckle-worthy gags, so it wasn't awful. The new characters aren't particularly memorable, except for possibly one of them, who I don't want to get into too far, but what I will say was I was intrigued by the upper midpoint twist that the movie went in. It didn't go in the same direction as all of the other Shin-Chan movies. This one also ends on a musical number, but I understand it in context, but I'm not as on board as I would normally be by finishing off the final boss with a musical number. The movie is watchable, and for some reason, I found myself enjoying it more than I probably should be. It did get me in some places, but I will say that it's also not a great showing for a Shin-Chan movie. There's better options out there. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 27, Honeymoon Hurricane, The Lost Hiroshi. Misae wins tickets to Australia, and they decide to go to Australia during a annual eclipse, solar eclipse, I believe. And they take the kids to Australia, where we hear about the legend of this like big fuck you emerald and a guy who's supposed to marry a princess, basically. And turns out Hiro is supposed to be the legendary prophesized like a groom for the princess, ends up getting kidnapped, and Misae, Shin, Himawari, Shiro, and this bounty hunter chick all go to rescue Hiro, and because he's being used as the key to this treasure, basically. This movie focuses a lot on the relationship between Hiro and Misae, because the trip itself is supposed to be sort of like a honeymoon for them, basically. It's not their second honeymoon, because they never actually went on their first honeymoon, but it's like a second honeymoon in spirit, right? And so there's a lot of focus on the relationship, and it is absolutely adorable. I just utterly gushed at the final scene of this. It's really cute. I love the focus on their relationship, especially because Hiro and Misae are like my 2 favorite characters in Shin-Chan. And during this, at one point, in what is quite possibly the best scene in any of these movies, there's a scene where Hiro puts on this just epic dance number. And it is great. He's just like mixes and matches these various dances. It is a delight. This movie is pretty damn good. Crayon Shin-Chan Movie 28, Crash, Rakugo Kingdom, and Almost 4 Heroes. So, the advisors to the king of the Rakugo Kingdom, which is basically a doodle kingdom comprised of doodles that lives up in the sky, is like this floating kingdom, is powered by doodle energy, and his advisors overthrow him because the kingdom is running out of doodle energy. So he bequeaths to his daughter a miracle crayon, who then she gives to another guy. For the record, the daughter, absolutely adorable. What a great character design. Anyway, the basic idea is the miracle crayon has to find its way into the hands of the Chosen One, which is going to save the kingdom. The Chosen One is Shin. You've probably figured that out. Through the movie, Shin also uses the miracle crayon, which can basically turn anything he draws into like real life. Uses it to, of course, create Burizamon, because he always does. He creates a pair of like underpants that are like used, that are completely sapient. He creates a character that's kind of like Nanako, but not actually like Nanako, like an off-brand Nanako. Throughout the course of the movie, they also meet like another young boy who's looking for his mom, but the advisors overthrow the king, and they go down to Kasukabe, imprison all the adults, and try and force children to constantly doodle to create enough doodle energy. A lot of the movie is a sort of like Shin and his doodles going through like adventure sequences, and it's kind of dull and it's kind of boring. The visuals on this movie are absolutely great. But what I have to say is, although I was not enjoying the movie for a good middle to most of the movie, the ending scenes when you get towards the climax are so fucking good, dude. Like, much better than the rest of the movie. I was surprised at how well it came together, because the characters I wasn't feeling at that time, like the new little boy and all of the drawings, they all had something to do, and they all ended up contributing to the overall end of the story, and it all kind of wrapped back in on itself to this like nice, kind of touching, very visually appealing climax. So most of this movie kind of sucks, but man, is that ending so goddamn good, and it actually honestly saves it. Crayon Shin-chan, movie 29, Shrouded in Mystery, The Flowers of Tenkazu Academy. So, Kazuma gets invited to Tenkazu Academy, which is a boarding school to train the elites. Elite is a big word that comes off very often in this movie. And so basically, the Kasukabe Defense Force are going there to study for a week, and it's ran by an AI which has like a point management system to tell you how elite you are. You don't actually get expelled, which is what you would expect if your points hit 0, but if you go into the negatives, you get put in the shit class with the dickheads. So this movie itself is actually about halfway of a mystery, where we introduce the Bumpire, which is the bum vampire, a vampire where if you go near the old clock tower at night, it'll bite your bum and it'll turn you into an idiot, forcing you to go into the negatives for your elite points and kicking you in the dum-dum class. At one point, Kazuma ends up getting bit by the Bumpire, and this creates a sort of mystery plot where the rest of the Kasukabe Defense Force have to try and figure out who the Bumpire is and who's behind it all. I will say that although the culprit was on my list of suspects, I do feel like there wasn't an adequate enough development of the mystery plot for this movie for you to get the answer, because in my head I was like desperately trying to figure it out. I wanted to beat them to it, and I did have the culprit again on my list of suspects, but they never like kept introducing more bits of evidence, and when they took someone out, it wasn't like necessarily the full clear you would have wanted, so it doesn't portray itself as the best of mysteries. And then about midway through, the mystery angle is actually dropped because the culprit is found, and then it turns into more of a sort of emotional conflict between Kazuma and the rest of the Kasukabe Defense Force. And what I will say is, during the mystery portions, I was absolutely enthralled by this movie, but when it comes into the like upper midpoint, it basically ends in like this big foot race. And we end up playing with one of the new characters that's been introduced. And you'd think I would be less enthralled. No, this foot race is exciting as shit. I was at the edge of my seat. There were so many like callbacks to things that had happened previously in the movie. All of the characters that had been introduced for this came back. All of the interactions that the characters had previously with the new characters came back. Just plot point after plot point, setup after setup, all paying off. Very satisfying. Very good. I might have been wrong. This might actually be the best Shin-chan movie. And considering that I can't currently watch movie 30, I have to say that for this being the final Shin-chan movie to watch as part of this episode, this is a great place to end off for Shin-chan. Twitch and Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. I have been Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this has been Water. Bye-bye.